So let's get started. I want to thank everyone, first of all, for coming into this dark, gloomy tent to talk about some really hard realities of what we do to animals. I know on a beautiful, joyful day like today, sun is sort of shining, music is playing, all your friends are here, amazing food. It's not exactly a great place to be. So thank you for showing up. Thank you especially to those who maybe this is new for, maybe you're not vegan, maybe you were dragged here. So we're going to talk about the ways that the animals in our food system are treated. This is maybe not going to be news to a lot of you. It's just going to be a bit of a rundown on what we do. And then we're going to talk about sort of the government's response and then what we can all do and hopefully end on a bit of a positive, optimistic note. So stick around. So let's get to it. So pigs are a lot like our beloved dogs. They are incredibly curious and playful. They love belly rubs. They like to roll around in the mud. That's how they cool off. Pigs don't have sweat glands, so the way that they cool off is they soak themselves in mud, just like we spend big bucks going to the spa. Pigs do the same thing for free in mud puddles. They are fastidious animals, actually, mud aside. If left to their own devices, they will separate their living quarters into places to eat, places to sleep, and places to use the bathroom. And I saw our friend Mike Downey here. He's not here at this exact moment, but he lives with pigs. They live in his house with him. He has organized his entire life around fighting to stay with his beloved pigs. So he can tell you that pigs are very much like the dogs that we know and love in their personality, in their mischievousness, in their desire to cuddle and love and be loved and live joyful, fulfilling lives. In our modern farms, pigs will never get a chance to go outside. The mother pigs are artificially inseminated. They're kept in tiny quarters called gestation crates where they spend their entire pregnancy. Anyone who's been pregnant knows that being confined is very uncomfortable. You want to move and stretch and you're achy. The pigs will often have pressure sores from moving up against the bars. They go crazy from the boredom. They will chew the bars or rub their heads or develop other what biologists call stereotypies that show that they're going insane from the lack of stimulation. When the pigs are ready to give birth, they're moved to farrowing crates, which is what you see here. These are the baby piglets. They'll never actually get to cuddle with their mother or really do anything as piglets like to do. At the age of 3 weeks, they're taken from their mother and put into pens, and in these pens they're grown to full size. Market weight is 6 months of age. So these then are still baby animals. These baby animals at 6 months of age are then taken to slaughter. Pigs used for food are killed by way of carbon dioxide. These chambers can be very painful. To the pigs, it feels like their lungs are being burned from the inside out. And footage from inside these slaughterhouses shows the pigs are squealing, screaming because it's very painful and very frightening for them. If you've ever spent any time with chickens in a rescue type of setting or another natural setting, you know that they're very active. They spend all day running around, pecking in the dirt, climbing, chasing each other. They're incredibly active, busy animals who love to be outside. They get clean by dust bathing, so they roll around in the dirt and they use their wings to pull the dirt up into their feathers, and that clings to particles, some little bugs that might be bothering them or any kind of dirt that they want to get off, and they shake off that dust, and that's how they get clean. They're very biologically driven to do that. Mothers will cluck to their chicks inside of the shells, and the unborn baby, unhatched I should say, babies inside the shells will peep back, and that's how they establish a bond with each other before the chicks are even hatched. Chickens have at least 30 vocalizations that we know that correspond with different communications. So they'll signal, there's a special kind of call for mothers to talk to or comfort their young. There's another kind of call that they'll use to warn of danger, and the call that they'll use will be different if the predator is coming by air or by land. So they communicate with each other and use all of these different vocalizations using language as we know it. If you've ever heard of a pecking order, this comes from chickens. So chickens establish these complex social hierarchies. Different chickens will have different personalities. There are different levels of gregariousness. They have different stations, if you will, in the pecking order. It's actually not unlike humans or cats, if anyone lives with cats. And they feel much more comfortable having this established social order. It helps them to know their place and feel less stressed out. And chickens have wonderful personalities. They have a whole range of different personalities, just like our dogs and cats. On modern meat farms, the chickens will never know their mothers. They are born in hatcheries where they're sorted on conveyor belts and shipped off in batches of 102 because that allows for 2 to die on their way to the farms. Then they're put into these warehouse-like settings where they will spend all of their time eating and sleeping and getting fattened up until their slaughter weight. They'll never know their mothers, and anyone who's raised chicks by hand knows that they are biologically motivated to seek out comfort and warmth. And in these warehouse-like settings, there's no natural light. The lights are kept on most of the time to keep them awake and eating, and so they're these exhausted orphans. Oh, sorry. The chickens that are used for meat, which are different than the chickens used for eggs, are genetically manipulated to grow very, very large very quickly. So by the time they're at slaughter weight, they're still so young. They're still just babies. They're still peeping. You can hear them peeping outside of slaughterhouses. They're only about 5 weeks old. But by this time, they're already enormous, the size of what a grown chicken should look like. And because of the genetical manipulation and the fast growing, they suffer all kinds of problems. So skeletal deformities, their bones, their soft, immature bones will collapse underneath the weight of their bodies. They will have cardiovascular problems because of the strain on their heart to try to pump the blood to these enormous bodies. They can suffer from heart attacks even as babies. So there's suffering really bred right into their DNA. When the chickens are considered market weight, they're rounded up for slaughter. This process is called chicken catching, and it's one of the most stressful incidents these chickens will ever experience in their entire lives. The workers come in the middle of the night when the chickens will be more sleepy and disoriented and easier to catch. Workers will catch up to 9 chickens in each hand, holding them by one leg. And then the chickens will often flap and struggle to right themselves because they're stressed out and scared and confused, and they want to get away from this threat. And because of all the struggling, there will be dislocated joints, bones will pierce skin, a huge amount of suffering until they're ultimately thrown in these transport crates. And they really are thrown. That's the only way of getting 9 birds from one hand into a crate. The chickens will continue to struggle and flap, and they're all every which way when they're put in these drawers, and then the drawers are pushed shut against their body parts. So again, there's bruising, broken bones, dislocations, and not to mention a huge amount of fear and terror, which might even be, some of the worst part for these baby animals. It's not much better. On the trucks, they're for the first time going to be exposed to the outside environment after living their lives in climate-controlled conditions. On the way to slaughter, animals can be exposed to extreme weather. Many chickens will die on very cold or very hot days. This is especially a problem in eastern Canada. Or the animals, because they're so crowded in these drawers and they're moving around on the trucks, they can suffocate from being jostling and piling up against one another. And when they arrive at the slaughterhouse, they're dumped out onto conveyor belts, and they are picked up by their legs and hung upside down into shackles at a rate of about 1 every 3 seconds. Those animals will then move along the slaughter line when they're killed by automated machinery. Sometimes it doesn't work. They move into a scalding tank, which is supposed to soften their feathers for removal, and they will then drown in these boiling hot scalding tanks. So it's not pretty from birth until death. In the egg industry, it's an entirely different breed of chicken. So these chickens are bred to lay about an egg every day. Now, of course, in nature, we know when birds lay eggs. It's in the springtime. They build their nests and they lay a reasonable number of eggs, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen eggs. This is true for chickens as well. Laying eggs is incredibly taxing on one's system. There's a lot of calcium that goes into the shell and the time spent brooding, sitting on the nest and laying the eggs. So just like with human mothers, reproduction is a very physically demanding system. And when we breed the chickens to lay just about an egg every day, day, it has a lot of unintended consequences, including calcium depletion, because they're losing all of the calcium to go into the shells. Well, it comes from their bones. Then their bones become very fragile and very liable to break. By the time chickens used for egg laying are sent to slaughter at only about 1.5 years of age, and chickens can live 10 or 15 years, they're in such severely bad shape that many of them can't even make it to slaughter. And veterinarians will say that these chickens are inherently compromised. They're inherently barely able to live. The birds spend their lives living on wire and wire cages. It's very painful and uncomfortable for them. They're crammed into cages, about 5 to 7 per small cage. They're supposed to get the size of about a computer pad, if you remember those, or it's less than the size of a sheet of paper, and that's for each bird. They never go outside. They never leave. They never get to establish a pecking order. They really never get to do anything that makes life remotely worth living. And also, these birds, when they're born in the hatcheries, the males are of no use because they can't lay eggs, and they're not usable for meat because they don't have that large breast meat that's commercially desirable in meat birds. So those baby chicks are killed instantly. They're ground up alive, or they're otherwise killed, put into macerators. So if you're not the type of person who would take a baby chick and drop it in a blender, maybe you aren't the kind of person who would want to support the egg industry. Sometimes people will learn about this and think that's awful. I need to buy cage-free eggs. This is a picture from inside a cage-free egg farm that's called an aviary system. These are considered the best commercial, most humane egg systems. Again, the animals are crowded. There is a lot of stress from living in these conditions. You can imagine if you were living with thousands of other people in a football stadium with no privacy, no fresh air, no sunlight, nothing like that. It's really no life at all. And sure, they have room to move around outside of the cage, but there are other problems created in these stressful conditions, notably the social stress. So there's more aggression and fighting and struggling from the stress and the amount of animals. There are also more diseases because there's more disease kicked up in these kinds of conditions, so mortality is actually even higher on the so-called humane egg farms. Cows, my personal favorite. I love cows. Earlier this week I went cow cuddling, one of my favorite things to do. Cows are incredible animals. They are very gentle, loyal, meditative animals. They develop deep relationships, and these deep relationships can produce intense loyalty, and they can also produce grudges. So cows have been known to hold a grudge for a long, impressive amount of time. At birth, mother cows and babies produce oxytocin. Same thing with us human mothers. That oxytocin is the love hormone, the bonding hormone, and that's what makes us feel that intense, euphoric love. Mothers out there know what I'm talking about. Cows feel the same way about their young. Cows are smart animals. They get excited about problem solving, as do we, and they're really lovely animals. Can you tell how much I love cows? In dairy farms, cows are artificially inseminated. They're kept pregnant virtually back to back. When their babies are born, they're taken away pretty much right away after birth. Even the industry recommends it be done within 24 hours because after that the bond starts to become even more intense. And the reason that their babies are taken away is because the humans need to take the milk for ourselves. And if the babies were drinking the milk, well, then there would be less for us to take. So the babies are carted off. And of course, cows have to be pregnant to lactate, right? I think we are sort of taught as a culture that that cows are just this magically lactating animal. But of course, once we think about that, we realize all mammals lactate in response to giving birth. And the milk is for their babies. That's what milk is. It's the fluid to grow their babies. When the calves are taken away, you can see here, these photos are taken on a humane organic dairy farm. So again, here you can see that the idea of humane animal farming is a bit of a psychological mirage. The babies are carted off and dumped into these huts where they'll be destined, the baby girls will be destined to become dairy cows themselves. The males will typically be destined to become veal calves, and they're fed lower grade formula. They're not given their mother's milk. They drink the formula, which of course means that they're more susceptible to disease. Sometimes they can be quite sickly. And more than that, they don't have the comfort of their mother. So if you've ever spent any time around calves, as I have, you know that they're, just like all baby animals, intensely motivated for comfort and for warmth and to be with their mothers. And as we talked about, cows are really social, loyal animals who deeply value their relationships. So this causes immense distress. After the cows have had about 4 or 5 back-to-back pregnancies, their bodies are worn out because this is very taxing. And also modern dairy cows are bred to produce about 10 times the amount of milk. So that's very taxing on their bodies. It can lead to infections such as mastitis, which I've had. It's very painful. It's an infection of the mammary gland, and it can feel like a very bad flu. There's often a lot of globules of pus that come through because of it. So it's, first of all, that's disgusting for the human food chain, but it's also very painful, so the cows are really suffering. Research from right here in BC shows that about 30% of dairy cows have mastitis at any one given time. So after this, after about 5 years of this, of losing back-to-back babies and suffering through milking every day and mastitis and deprivation and the lack of outdoors, they are then sent to slaughter at about a quarter of their natural lifespan. Cows used in the food industry, so the beef industry, don't have it too much better. They're raised by the thousands in feedlots. Here's a feedlot in Alberta that I borrowed from the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association. So you can see there's just vast amounts of feedlots there. When they're kept on the dirt like this, they're not able to eat grass, and that's the point, is to keep them on dirt where they can't access grass, so they're forced to eat the corn, which makes for a better quality, cheaper quality meat product, but causes the cows intestinal distress. It's like giving them McDonald's, basically. They like it, but it's really not good for them, and they suffer for it. And because they're living on dirt all the time, when it rains, it turns into mud, so they're living in their own waste, essentially. So, because they're also living in these large herds, which is very unnatural, again, for these very social animals, it's stressful to them. They experience the stress of having lots and lots of strangers and just unsettling of their social structures. So we really manipulate their lives in these settings where there's a vast amount of animals. And I think you can relate if you imagine yourself in that type of situation, just with tons and tons of strangers, sort of, day after day, hour after hour. It would become very stressful very quickly in those crowded conditions. We forget about fish. They look so different to us. We don't share our homes with anything that even resembles fish. It's hard to really empathize with them. We have to really practice and really make a special effort to practice that empathy. What is it like to be a fish? We don't know. We don't sort of necessarily immediately feel what they feel. And yet fish have nervous systems that are very similar to our own, leading experts to conclude that they very likely suffer in ways that we do, both emotionally and physically. And this makes sense, right? Because emotional sentience and physical sentience are biological adaptations. There's nothing sort of ephemeral about them. There are biological adaptations that encourage us to seek family and companionship for safety, that encourage us to avoid harmful stimuli, and fish are exactly the same. Even in lab settings, it's been shown that they will avoid these harmful stimuli, and they have social groupings, and there's no reason to believe that they don't also have complicated social structures. It has been shown that fishes can use tools, which blows my mind. They can memorize topographical maps. They have relationships. So, the entire world of fishes has really only begun to be explored. We are just scratching the surface on our knowledge of them, but the more we learn, the more we realize we really don't know very much at all, and we've really underestimated our underwater cousins. Of course, in the commercial fishing industry, we are essentially decimating our oceans. This is a major environmental concern as well as an ethical concern. We are killing it's estimated that we kill between 1 trillion and 2.7 trillion fishes each year. So for context, we kill about 60 billion as a planet, 60 billion land animals each year. So the number is way, way, way bigger for these aquatic animals. The numbers are really staggering. They are often killed by these deep sea trawlers, which just sort of scoop up anything in their path. A lot of animals that are caught as bycatch and will be thrown back dead or dying. Anything in its way, so dolphins, sea turtles, seals, animals like that will be caught up by these nets as well. Sometimes the fishes are used as fish feed, so they're then used for by salmon farms or other farms like that, or even they're fed to land animals like chickens. So the industries are all really related. In BC, we have a big salmon farming industry. Maybe people are familiar with the work of Alex Morton. She's shown how the animals on these fish farms suffer from piscine rheovirus, so it's a type of serious flu, very contagious. It's threatening the wild salmon. It causes them immense distress. This is a very sickly looking salmon here. You can see who's emaciated and just really not well. This is not terribly uncommon. It's a real concern, both from an environmental and an ethical point of view. Okay, how you doing? That was the hardest part. I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the grief that a lot of us feel. It can be really, really hard for those of us who care to learn about what's happening to animals. I know when I first learned about what was happening, I was so shocked and so horrified that I couldn't sleep. I stayed up at night worrying and wondering what I could do about it and just being completely overwhelmed by the scope of the problem. Maybe people can relate to that. We're not just grieving for the animals, we're grieving for the loss of innocence in a way, because we've sort of lived our lives in this happy bubble. And now all of a sudden we realize that we've been lied to. We've been lied to by our teachers, by our parents, by people who should have been looking out for us. And we've been reading these children's books that are presenting farming in this idyllic way. And it's really not reality. There's this collective lie going on. And when we wake up and learn the truth about what's happening to animals, we really start to grieve for the loss of that belief in the goodness of the world. And then on top of that, we're grieving because we realize when we start to talk to people about it that people might not have the same reaction we do. Maybe they don't care. Or maybe they're hostile towards you for presenting them with this information. Maybe they argue with you and they give you the stupidest arguments about plants have feelings too. What about our canines? And we've been doing it for thousands of years, and all of these arguments when you're saying, you know, hey, look, what we're doing to animals is so bad, and we should be kind to animals. Isn't it so simple? Isn't it so obvious? And when you're met with resistance, it can make you see people in a new light. Suddenly your loved ones look different to you. Like, how could they be defending something this awful? And you really need to recalculate and reconsider these relationships with people. I know for me that was a really tough thing as well. I am still not really used to it. I still sort of struggle to I'll never see the world in the same way, but certainly I look at people in a whole new light. Suddenly there's a litmus test, like for what, is this person going to care? And if they don't, it can be really hard to still respect them in the same way. So usually people will learn about this and go, well, what's the government doing about this? Isn't this Canada? Don't we have a government that takes care of stuff like this? So here's what the government's doing about this. So animals on farms are covered by general animal cruelty laws. So we've got the criminal code that prevents cruelty to animals, and we've also got provincial animal welfare laws that essentially prevent the same thing, prevent causing unnecessary suffering to animals. But keep in mind, these laws are general animal cruelty laws. They apply to cats and dogs, they apply to orcas in captivity, they apply to animals in labs. They really apply to all animals without any really specificity for what can be done. The biggest problem with these laws is their enforcement. They're essentially unenforceable because farming of animals takes place on private property. And the animals are invisible. They're kept in these warehouse-like facilities with no windows. Nobody can see into them. So the only people who are going to be witnesses to cruelty are the employees of the operations themselves. And so those employees would then need to either be whistleblowing on themselves or they would need to be whistleblowing on their employees. But part of the problem with these industries is so much suffering is inherent in the industry that they're only recruiting people who can tolerate this kind of suffering in the first place, and then those people in turn are becoming even more desensitized. So imagine if your job is to show up at work and to pick up handfuls of baby chickens and to throw them into crates, well, it's not going to be long before you just stop seeing these animals as individuals. You would have to psychologically cope with those conditions. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to us that workers are very quickly losing the ability to empathize, and we wouldn't want them to. That would be asking them to endure trauma on our behalf. So it makes a lot of sense. And yet we know that the violence inherent in these industries causes a lot of suffering to the humans who work in them too. So for example, we know that when slaughterhouses go into towns, the rate of violent crimes against humans and the rate of property crimes will also go up because there's more violence experienced by these people. So that's the real issue with the laws, is that they are there, but there's so much violence itself that we're really not seeing a lot of enforcement. In addition to the institutional cruelty, animal abuse and neglect become very normal. And it's really only when somebody takes it upon themselves in an undercover sort of way to go into one of these facilities, wired with a hidden camera, document the footage themselves, and then present it to law enforcement, that we really ever see much enforcement of these laws. So it's really a Sisyphean task. On top of that, we have farming practices exemption. So under provincial law, including here in BC, reasonable and generally accepted farming practices are exempt from the prohibitions on causing animals to be in distress. So what does that mean? That means that you're allowed to cause animals to be in distress if it's a generally accepted farming practice. So if confining hens into tiny, barren wire cages for their entire lives is common enough, if everyone's doing it, then it's considered okay. So this, I think obviously presents a real problem where it's the industry itself is sort of determining if it's widespread enough, if enough people are doing it, they're allowed to do it to animals. And there's no real conversation about, well, what makes sense from the animal's point of view. It's all commercial incentives that are determining how animals are being treated. The government does step in and regulate transport and slaughter. So there's federal laws that apply to animals sort of the moment they step foot off the farm. And then on the way to slaughter. But these laws are generally food safety laws. So they are meant to protect our food supply chain, essentially, and there is a bit of an animal welfare dimension to them, but the laws are not designed to protect animals. And again, even there, what we're seeing is there's so much repeat offenders that the violations are considered a cost of doing business, and then on top of that, law enforcement is just really not very vigorously enforcing the laws. So we've heard anecdotal reports of inspectors avoiding the kill floor so they can avoid having to see violations and avoid having to do the paperwork, because remember, they're there for all of food safety, so they can just busy themselves in another area of the processing facility where they won't be seeing the live animals. And what we also know in practice is you can look at these laws and they look really good. Hey, look, these laws say that you have to kill animals humanely. That's fantastic. We should be killing animals humanely. I'm okay with killing animals if you do it humanely. The laws are there. Well, here's the truth, is that the laws allow for a margin of error, and that margin of error means that some animals are going to be improperly stunned, or some animals are going to be missed, or there's going to be some problems here or there, and there's wiggle room. So it's not that every single time there's a problem with an animal, law enforcement is stepping in. It's really a broad-based pattern. If thousands of animals are being missed in a pattern of a way, maybe law enforcement is going to step up and do something meaningful, but essentially there's the margin of error with hundreds of thousands of animals means that many, many thousands of animals are suffering to death, even with government oversight. So where do the laws, the rules to govern farm animals come from? Well, they come from the industry themselves. They come from a body called the National Farm Animal Care Council. And this organization is primarily made up of industry players. There are some token animal welfare voices, but it's primarily groups like the Canadian Meat Council, the egg producers. They get together and they decide what their rules are going to be. And it's done on a consensus basis, so they will decide, are we going to allow ourselves to genetically manipulate animals? Sure, that sounds fine. So they are really deciding how they're going to be treating animals, and the government, for its part, is actually endorsing this process. So instead of regulating farming themselves, they're giving they're endorsing and funding the development of these codes of practice. And one thing to know about these codes of practice as well is that there's no enforcement mechanism, and there couldn't be one because since they're not law, there's no way that they can be enforced. So essentially they're creating laws, but they're creating rules, but they're really just guidelines, and there's no way of that the government can come along and go onto farms, which again are private property, and enforce these standards. So they're incredibly toothless, even if they didn't allow for blatant animal cruelty, which they do. It's a classic situation of the fox guarding the hen house. Okay, but it's not all bad news. So there's two ways that the government can really do things for farmed animals. One is to regulate farming, which as we just talked about, they're not doing. The other is for them to regulate how we eat by encouraging a shift towards a plant-based diet, which I'm beyond thrilled to report that they are doing. They are starting to do. So for anyone who has not been paying attention, if you've been under a rock, recently Health Canada has published its draft food guide. So for the first time in about a decade, the government is overhauling our recommended food guide, our recommended eating behaviors, and the government is totally changing the food recommendations. So instead of having the classic food groups, so we used to have fruits and vegetables was one group, grain products was another group, meat and alternative was another group. So even though the government recommended to eat legumes often, legumes were under that alternative category, and everyone knows an alternative is second best. And we also had the milk and alternatives category. So milk had the dairy industry got its own special food category there, unlike any other protected industry, leading everyone to believe that cow's milk is an essential part of a grown human diet. Well, no more. So the draft eating recommendations are looking fantastic. Now the government is, instead of recommending food groups, it's recommending a broad-based eating pattern that's sensitive to and respectful of a diversity of eating habits. A big part of it, they said, was all of the feedback they got from vegans and vegetarians who said, this food guide, as it is, just does not serve us. Yeah, amen. Yeah, so they heard us. So 2 thumbs up to any activists out there who's trying and who's making comments, because it works. It really works. They heard our collective voices. So now the government is recommending, you can see, and by the way, these aren't published yet, and you can go on to foodguideconsultation.ca to say what you like and don't like about it. They have asked me to pass along to anyone to participate in the forum on the website, so do that. So let them know, how stoked you are about a lot of these recommendations. So we're seeing here a recommendation of especially plant-based sources of protein. We know that this is the more healthful way of getting protein. You're getting all of the amino acids in a package including fiber and other essential vitamins with none of the saturated fats. So it's a great way of getting that macronutrient. We're also seeing a movement away from saturated fat, and as you likely know, saturated fat is pretty much exclusively found in animal foods. There's also some tropical oils. Coconut and palm oil contain saturated fat, but primarily it's just animal foods that have saturated fat. Government is saying loud and clear, move away from those and choose unsaturated fats instead. And we're also seeing for the first time a recognition of the environmental impact of our food choices. So the government is saying that how we eat has implications for our environment. And I would go a step further and say that therefore it also has implications for our health, right? Our mental and physical health. So look at all the people right now, for example, displaced by forest fires in BC. These forest fires likely are linked to climate change. And because of all the displacement of these climate change related forest fires, people are definitely suffering. Their health is being compromised. So if we are thinking about eating in a holistic way, it definitely makes sense to look at the environmental impact of our food choices. And of course, feed to farmed animals, channeling it inefficiently through farmed animals is very inefficient. Instead of just eating the grains directly, you're growing the grains, feeding it to the farmed animals, keeping them alive, giving them water, cleaning the resources, shipping products around. So it's incredibly damaging. It contributes to raising in greenhouse gas emissions, water and air pollution, loss of biodiversity, a whole host of environmental problems. And the government is recognizing that for the first time. So you don't need to wait for the government to take action. Of course, you can take personal action. I suspect most people here have already done that and are already choosing vegan options and learning how to cook plant-based food. These are dishes that I have made for my family. I have an Instagram account, Easy Animal Free, because I've learned that for a lot of people, they get it. They understand, yeah, what we're doing to animals is really messed up, and in this day and age where we have access to a plethora of food options in grocery stores, we really have no excuse to not choose the least destructive and the least cruel options. And yet, people have a hard time. What are they going to eat? It does require learning new habits, but I want to say for anyone who hasn't made that leap yet, the hardest part is getting started. Once you actually get started and start learning new habits, you quickly realize how very easy it is and even enjoyable it can be. So you've got curries and chilies and soups and stews, big quinoa salads and bowls with a whole variety of dressing. You could never get bored of it. Pastas, we've got whole wheat pasta with cashew cream or lentil bolognese. Quinoa bowls, so easy to make. Just make a green vegetable or some kind of vegetable, grain of some kind, bean or legume of some kind, and a killer sauce, and they're easy to make. You've got stir fries, you've got tacos, pretty much anything you like to eat as a non-vegan, you can veganize, you can make it more humane, and you can make it healthier for you. I think a lot of people have this false belief that when you go vegan, you're depriving yourself. You're giving up. You're giving up your favorite foods. You're giving up the ease of some social situations. And I want to say that for me, and for a lot of people that I've talked to, you actually gain so much more than you give up when you stop consuming animal foods and start consuming plant-based foods instead. I think a lot of us are pursuing happiness, right? We're pursuing a sense of meaning and happiness in life. We all want to feel connected. We all want to feel like our life is worth something, like there's something that drives us and gets us out of bed in the morning. We're told that we need to take care of ourselves first and think only about ourselves. And I think that's only partly true, because in addition to taking care of ourselves, we need to look beyond ourselves and we need to contribute. Research from the blue zones are the zones of the world where there are the longest lived people, so the people who live the longest lives and the healthiest lives, they're living to be centenarians, 100 plus years old, in good health and still very active. It finds that these people all are able to articulate a purpose in life. And research shows that people who can articulate that purpose in life live 7 years longer on average. So that's a huge health benefit. If you're able to articulate purpose, you can add 7 years to your life. That's like giving up smoking. So it's incredibly powerful adding that sense of meaning. It's not just about eating well or working out, but it's a much more holistic view of getting connection. And you know, a lot of people will find that when there's a lot of really shitty things happening in the world, right? There's a lot happening, especially now. We've got Trump in office. Climate change is becoming even more and more of a concern every day. There's indigenous violence. There's violence against women. There's wars going on. It can feel incredibly overwhelming to be a person who cares in this world and to see all of the bad things that are happening. And part of it is that we're paralyzed. There's nothing we can do about it, about many of these problems. We can learn about it. We can read about it. We can talk to people about it. But there's nothing that we personally can do. With veganism or a plant-based diet, there is something you can do. There's something you can do every single time you eat. And that is a very powerful feeling. It's incredibly empowering to be able to actually actively solve a problem in the world by sitting down to a delicious meal. I can think of no other social problem where you can actively solve it in such a joyful way. So right now we're living at a tipping point. The truth about animals is starting to come out, and it's going to be a real litmus test. What do you do when you find out about what's happening to animals? Do you turn away? Do you make excuses? Do you argue with people? Do you shoot the messenger? Do you pretend it's not happening? Do you resist caring? Or do you let yourself feel it? Do you let it wash over you? And do you try to become part of the solution? So I want to invite, I know this is kind of heavy and I'm really feeling that, and I again want to say thank you so much to everyone who has come and has stayed with me through this whole through this whole talk. I want to invite some questions if people have questions. I know probably a lot of people here are vegan. If we want to talk about veganism, that's great. If anyone has transition questions, we can maybe take them together as a community. If you also just want to leave and go enjoy the festival, that's cool too. It's not personal. I totally get it. So thank you again for coming. And huge thanks to the organizers as well. This is an amazing festival.